All right, everybody, this is Sheets, and we're going to be going over the Survivor pool slate for week 4. And again, I'm going to review what's important, what isn't, and just kind of some general reminders. And it's going to get a little more fun as we continue to press on. So again, the key to good Survivor play, a couple of things. Number one is, remember, you're not just trying to survive week to week, right? You're trying to win the whole pool and be the last one in. So it's not just about picking the most likely winner every week. So what's important is that, again, 2 components. Number one is the immediate EV of that team for this week. In other words, a function of the chances that the team wins, with the popularity of how often that team is going to be played by other players in the pool. We gave a good example last week of a team that had certainly the best winning chances, but because it was picked by such a huge amount of the pool, it was just a really bad Survivor pick. It turns out that, we didn't actually cash in on it, because even though 50% of the people took a team, doesn't mean they're necessarily going to lose, right? So we did have good EV going into last week. We survived most of our entries, and that's what you do. You make good plays, and just you keep doing that week after week. So again, that's kind of a long way of saying immediate EV is a really important component. And again, that's a combination of winning odds and the popularity, or how often that team rates to be taken. And the second component is future value, which is sort of, it has 2 components to it. Number one is, in its purest form, is you don't want to take teams now necessarily when you might have a chance to take them later with a little more leverage, right? So you take a team like Baltimore, for example. They're going to be, Baltimore-Kansas City is going to be the biggest favorites most of the weeks. But that means is that you're going to be, it's possible that you're going to be better off waiting until later to take them. Whereas other teams, if you can get them like a bad team that happens to be in a great spot now, you'll never, ever have another chance to take them. You may as well get rid of them now. The other important thing about future value is, and this is kind of hard to say, that the future value is different for each person. In other words, the future value of teams depends on what you've taken already, right? So for some people, if they've already taken, say, New England, right? You know what I mean? Or they only have certain teams available later, that the future value for their picks this week is different than yours if you've taken different teams. And we'll try to give you examples of that throughout the next couple of weeks, because as I mentioned before the first week, the most important component of Survivor pool picks starts off with immediate EV. In other words, at the beginning of the season, immediate EV is most important. Number one, because it's just more likely that your numbers are accurate, right? It's a lot more likely that your numbers for winning chances and popularity are more accurate than your assessment of the future value of that team, right? Because the future could go up maybe 15, 16, 17 weeks, in the future. So the further in the future you have to project, the less reliable those projections are. So at the beginning of the season, you really have to overweight immediate EV. Now, as you get towards the middle of the season, then you really need to start mapping how you're going to win. In other words, you really have to start thinking, okay, so if I take this team now, what am I giving up on my entry later? Or if I fade this team now and save them for later, is maybe that's something I want to do. So I'm going to give you kind of general advice, but you're going to need to, use your own ticket. You know what I mean? You need to look at your own ticket, your own set of entries to determine the path that's going to take you to the end, right? So like, for example, in one tournament or in one entry, I have New England, and we put a lot of New England, a lot of Cleveland, whatever. So the entries that have Cleveland, that I burn Cleveland, I'm in great shape because I never have to worry about taking Cleveland again, right? the other thing about taking Cleveland is that when I take Cleveland, that means I'm not taking another team. So I have stuff like Baltimore and Kansas City and New England and teams like that available for the future. So when you go through your picks for the week, you have to both keep in mind what you're doing from an EV perspective this week and how that's going to play into your plan like a little bit later. So we gave a couple of examples, like if you look out into the future, you could see that, say, Baltimore in week 15 rates to be maybe a 5-point higher favorite than the next best team. So they're going to have a lot of leverage. So if you are between them and another equal team this week, might be a good idea to kind of fade them because, you're going to probably need them here in 15 a little bit more than you might need them today, okay? Again, that's just an example. You might actually need them today, but we'll get into that a little bit later. You look at a couple of other examples, off into the future a little bit, like week 14. Yeah, it'd be nice to have Seattle over here, right? Week 13, it'd be nice to have Kansas City. It's always nice to have Kansas City. Week 12, Dallas is going to be it's going to be, number one, it's going to be a really strong play. And number two, the problem is that everybody's going to have them available. So you have to factor that in, is that yeah, you do want to, in some sense, save Dallas for week 12. But the problem is that everybody's going to have Dallas available, and they're all going to take them. So for me, it's probably more important to save a team like New Orleans for week 12 or Green Bay for week 12, because even though Dallas is the most likely, team, if you could save New Orleans for week 12, you'll end up with incredible leverage over Dallas, because you'll end up with 70% of the people maybe taking Dallas and maybe only a few of you taking New Orleans, because, and this is where it all kind of gets fun, because New Orleans, maybe some people are suckers and take New Orleans in week 7, right? So all the New Orleans will be burned and all the New Orleans will be gone, such that when you get to week 11, right? Not week 11, week 12, where the entire civilized world is taking Dallas, you'll still have New Orleans available to go ahead and get leverage off of them. So those are the things you have to kind of think about. So let's just go over some picks for this week. So when week 4, what we like to do is rank the teams first by immediate EV, right? So the teams with the most immediate EV, number 1 is Baltimore. That's pretty clear. They have the highest winning percentage by a ton. And yeah, they have, some ownership, like 23%, but they're not the highest owned. Why is that? So the reason why is because there's one team that's being owned by about 55% of the population, and that's the Rams. And the reason why, by the way, 55% of the people are owning them is because, this might be the only chance you have to get the Rams at an enormous favorite, right? So where Baltimore, even though they're the most, likely winner by maybe 1 or 2%, people know that they could take Baltimore all, a zillion other times. So people are going to be pounding on the Rams. So what ends up happening is that the Rams becomes, in my opinion, an incredibly terrible play, okay? Because, yeah, they have probably this top or second top winning chance, but 55% ownership just provides so much leverage against them. And you'd be surprised how often 17% losing chances come in. So, that's why you rank these things by EV, so that all stuff gets kind of factored in. Like if you see this, like the Rams are kind of rated to be the 3rd, 6th, maybe the 10th best team with respect to EV. So I'm never going to take them. And there are some sharp people that think otherwise. What they'll say is, well, I made some good picks in the last couple of weeks, and I will, I'm going to have good opportunities later to get leverage on that. So I'm going to take the safest play this week so that I can capitalize on my skill edge or my previously good picks a little bit later. But for me, that reminds me of these old poker arguments where, people would make an intentionally bad play now because of this alleged skill edge they have that they could exploit later. And for me, the way I look at it is that part of your skill edge is just making good plays every week anyway. So I'm not playing the Rams for a dime, and just going to be rooting for the Giants against them 55% ownership. So the top EV play is Baltimore, but as you can see, they have just a ton of future value, right? We already identified 2 or 3 really, really good spots a little bit later where you're going to be able to and want to use them. So what becomes kind of the art of this is balancing how important it is to take the top EV team versus how important it is to, you know, give respect to the future value. So for me, I think that Baltimore is a secondary play here. I feel as though if you have multiple entries, you could play a certain amount of Baltimore. Maybe go with the field. Like maybe if you play 10, you know, if you have 10 entries in something, maybe you play 2 Baltimores. If you have 5 entries, maybe play 1 Baltimore. Maybe something like that. Again, there's no way to calculate necessarily the value of what future value is, except to say that, you know, in week 4, future value is not quite as predictable as it would be if it was like, say, week 10, right? Because who knows? I mean, maybe Lamar Jackson gets hurt. Maybe the whole team gets COVID. I mean, who the hell knows what, especially in today's day, what's going on. So I think they're not a complete fade, but they're a secondary play. So the next thing I look at is this next group of kind of EV plays, which are just kind of all ranked together: Green Bay, Kansas City, San Francisco, and Tampa, and to a lesser extent, Seattle. But you'll see that to separate these 4, that's when you could like really go to future value. So like you'll see that Kansas City has an incredible amount of future value. So they're going to be a toss for me. It's going to be between Green Bay, San Fran, and Tampa as the top plays in single picks. Now, if you're in a pool that goes to double picks a little later, we have to have that discussion a little differently because future value becomes so much more important that, you know, you have to take some EV shots early, some low IEV shots early in the name of saving some of these really good teams to be available in doubles. But we're talking about single pick pools here. You know, you have San Francisco as probably the top play, all things considered, because they have one of the top EVs and they have probably the lowest amount of future value of all of them. So San Francisco is a top play, and then Tampa would be the second best play, I think. So for me, it would be San Francisco at the top, and that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. And then Tampa, and then probably, well, how do you separate Green Bay from San Francisco? Green Bay just have a little, the future value is a little bit too strong. So I guess San Francisco a little better than Green Bay, and then maybe Tampa third. So I would say, depending on how many entries, like for me, like on one of my main pools, I'm going to play, let's say I have 5 entries. I'll probably play 3 San Frans, 1 Green Bay, 1 Tampa. But maybe I'll go 2 San Frans, 2 Tampa, 1 Green Bay, something like that. And then maybe I'll play 1 Baltimore. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. So it's more important, I guess, to know what I'm not going to do. So I'm going to have 0 Rams. I'm just not going to have a cent of them, and I'm just going to be rooting against them. If, God forbid, the Giants somehow win, which they're not going to, but if they do, that's like half the pool gone. Okay, so that would be like an incredible thing, and yeah, that's just the way I play. So it's going to be San Fran, then Tampa and Green Bay. Those would probably be my top picks survivor-wise for this week. And then with respect to how they fit into your plan of how you're going to win, we got to talk a little bit more about mapping and paths to winning maybe after the next week. But for now, let's continue to educate you guys on just making good EV plays, balancing EV and future value. And remember, again, don't replace your particular biases with how these teams' winning chances rate, you know what I mean, to Vegas. Unless you're a real expert, or unless you have a really, really strong opinion, you really don't want to get too crazy about that. And the other thing is you don't want to double count stuff. Like so San Francisco, for example, they rate to be a 73% favorite. all of the things associated with San Francisco's injuries, for example, is already factored into the price. You know, and Nick Mullins being the quarterback is already factored into the price. So you can't say, well, I would take San Francisco. They look like they have good EV, but, you know, I don't trust Nick Mullins. Okay. Or I don't trust the team with all the injuries. Well, you know what? If they didn't have the injuries, if they didn't have, you know, sure, if they had freaking Joe Montana and a healthy defense, they'd probably have like 98% winning chances, whatever it is. But that's why you're only going to see 2% ownership on this team, because they only have 73% winning chances. But all that's been factored into the price already. So I guess that's pretty much it. It's an interesting week. It's an extremely interesting week because clearly the two best plays, I mean, the two most likely winners are Baltimore and the Rams. And I think only one of them is playable, and that's Baltimore. And even so, I think Baltimore is probably a secondary play. All right, that's it. Good luck this week, and hopefully we keep pressing on.